Hi, it's Tim Hagen from Progress Coaching, and we're going to talk about 6 strategic steps to building a coaching culture. Now, there's a lot of content out there, and let me give you a little bit of background on us. We've been doing this for 31 years, solely teaching leaders how to coach. That is our mainstay in the industry, our mainstay in the workplace. Now, as we go through each steps, I'm going to give you some narratives. So if you have a pad of paper, anybody who knows me knows I talk too fast and I give a lot of content, but I want to give you, specific strategies. Now, some of the strategies are going to come off like a sales pitch because I'm also going to represent that we actually do some of the things that we're suggesting. This isn't concept for us. We actually live this. So when you're building a coaching culture, you have to first define it. A coaching culture at ABC Corp is by doing what? You have to define it so you know what you're aspiring to. Do not take that lightly. Here's why. You should also define what is coaching. If you don't define it, what will happen is people will put their own spin or narrative on it. A lot of times, and I'm working with a client right now who literally said, well, we kind of thought coaching was a corrective action. And with all the, the public persona and feedback and thought leadership out there about coaching, there are still a large number of organizations that feel like coaching is a punitive, corrective type of action. Coaching for us, the way we define it is a scheduled investment that people make in other people, strategically leveraging their strengths to open up doors where they have opportunities to improve, always helping people feel good about getting better. That's our definition. So the first thing you have to do is develop what is called a coaching framework. Let me do a parallel for you. So if you were to go up and do a speech, okay, I'm going to go to number 2 and talk about coaching skills here in a second, but I'm going to come back to number 1 and talk about a framework. If you have good speaking skills and you have good coaching skills, that doesn't mean you're going to get from point A to point Z. So if we were to say to somebody who has to do a speech, well, just get up and wing it. Don't worry about structure. Don't worry about the framework of the speech. You would think that's crazy. Coaching has to have a framework. That framework has to be something that the leader or the person doing the coaching can follow. Or if they don't follow it, we will tend to show up and just shoot from the hip. And when we shoot from the hip, we will tend to gravitate towards feedback. When we gravitate towards feedback, we will gravitate towards constructive feedback. That is not a coaching culture. That is delivering constructive feedback. So let me just share with you our framework. And I only share this with you in the context of, I'm looking for it right now just so you have it. And this might be it. This is not it. This is it right here, QUALMS. So QUALMS is something that stands for questions, activities, learning projects. That is your one-on-one or your group coaching model. Number 2, the M is the motivator, coaching to where that person wants to go. The biggest mistake leaders make is they try to motivate people specific to the job. Before you motivate anyone, you have to first understand what motivates them. Now, we all get the objection, right? I don't have time. I wish I could coach. So QUALMS, the S of QUALMS is supplemental coaching. Things that the leader or the person who's doing the coaching can prescribe that does not take someone any in-person time. So with that being said, the coaching framework you have to have for one-on-one and group coaching. It's a map to have those conversations. I promise you, if you do not have a coaching framework, you will not be successful. Number 2, coaching skills. I'm going to say it. Everybody hates to practice. The dreaded R word, role playing. Nobody likes to practice. If you're not practicing, you're not arbitrarily getting better. There is a major shift that leaders make going from telling and feedback to asking. So let me give you an example. If you have someone with a negative attitude, what do? We call them in the office. John, I'm getting pretty upset. Stop. I'm going to stop myself. I'm getting upset. Now I made it about me. That just emotionally triggered that person to do what? My boss is upset with me. I better back up. I better say the right things. I better get through this conversation. That's how subtle conversations can be in terms of having good ones and not so good ones. Or if I say, John, your attitude just stinks. You got to cut it out. John will come up with reasons why I'm wrong. He's not going to look at me and say, you know what, you're right. For a decade, I've just been terrible. Thanks for the revelation. I didn't know what the issue was, but I think you've solved it. Please tell me you're laughing. So, at the crux of that is something called self awareness, one of the five major tenets of emotional intelligence: self awareness, self regulation, empathy, motivation, and social skills. Self awareness is looking in the mirror, number one. Number two, being really honest with yourself. And then number three, doing something about what you see in the mirror. Very few people do it on their own. Tasha Eurich, which has a book, and I don't know if I have that image here. I might. I don't think I do. And she actually has a book called Insight. It's a New York Times bestseller. 95% of the people, when asked in her survey, said, yes, I'm highly self-aware. When she tested them, only 10% were. Think about that. If you're a leader with 8.5 out of 10 people on your team significantly, not kind of, significantly lacking self-awareness, guess what? You have a tough job ahead of you. So, coaching skills is about asking questions. Let's go back to John, our negative attitude employee. We can sit down with John and say, John, well, what are you going to do to positively engage with that employee? On a scale of 1 to 6, John, 6, you're positive with your teammates all the time. 1, you can be a little bit arduous at times or maybe even a little bit choppy. Where would you rate yourself and why? People typically go in the middle. Well, I'm about a 3 or 4. Well, John, what do you think we need to do to move towards a 6? And what's the first action you would encourage us to take? What I just demonstrated was a self-actualized question. It's a what question plus a success imperative. What are you going to do to successfully, and then fill in the blank? The rating question is 1 to 6, 1 to 8. And then the gap response is, so what do we need to do to move towards an 8? What's the first step you would encourage us to make? The reason I'm stressing we and us is most people won't travel up a hill called Change Hill unless somebody goes with them. Because when they slide down to the back end of the mountain or the hill and they slide down to the bottom and they have a choice of going back up that hill and trying again, most people will give up. 71%, let's just call it 70, according to Gallup organization, are neutral or actively disengaged. Only 30% are positively engaged. Plus 85% are lacking self-awareness. That is a daunting task for leaders to embrace. Daunting. Now, what do we do about it? We tend to have a very top-down approach. Leaders get trained. They have to coach. They have to mentor. They have to lead. They have to manage. And I don't entirely agree with that. Here's why. The third thing we have to do is teach our employees coachability and approachability. I love to cite youth sports. And for somebody who's been coaching boys volleyball on and off for about 30 years, I always go back to the fundamentals. I would teach our boys, you have to ask for feedback from 1 to 2 teammates every 2 weeks. And your only response can be, thank you. I don't care if you agree or disagree with that. Don't say, well, give me an example. Everybody says that. The reason people want examples is so they can situationally rebuttal. Well, no, see, in that case, what I meant was, and then we hide behind our intent. We absolve ourselves of the perception we've created. People need to learn to hear things and be quiet so we can embrace and reflect and then say, you know what? I did come off a little tough in that meeting, or I was interruptive of Sarah when she was speaking, or whatever the case might be. So we actually teach employees how to seek feedback. We teach something called EAT feedback. So I'll talk about that just for a second. EAT is embrace, ask, and tell. And it's a cadence of helping cultivate something called emotional interpretation. So psychologically, when someone says, Tim, you have a negative attitude, the first thing I would do with embrace is say, well, first of all, thanks for the feedback. The A is, well, let me ask you, what are 2 things, you would encourage me to do to improve in that area? Not give me an example, but let me ask you what you think I need to do to improve. Someone responds. Now I'm going to tell you the T. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do with your feedback, which creates the ownership. We do this with companies, and at about the 60-day mark, people are like, yeah, this is getting easier, because most of the time we tighten up when we hear something we don't like. It's not us. It's got to be somebody else. And we push people away from us. I always tell people there's a push-pull effect. When you walk into a picnic or a cocktail party or a company event and you see that person, the person like, oh, the air gets thicker. They're here. Oh, and everybody starts whispering. That person has a push-pull effect. Someone like, for example, with a negative attitude, people don't walk towards that person. They walk away from that person. Every single one of us push or pull people. We either pull people towards us or we push people away. We may not want to talk about it. We may not want to admit it. 99% of the time, when I ask the question, how many of you think your leaders need to improve? Almost every hand goes up. And then I ask the question, how many of you think you need to be easier to manage and coach? And then people do this. Is anybody else raising their hand? Because I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be that lady. I don't want to admit it's me. And that's tough, right? And we don't teach that in our school systems. We don't teach it in youth sports. I mean, think about youth sports when the parents go to the coach and complain about what? Oh, playing time. Guess what happens? That person is going to become very self-righteous, very thoughtful just for themselves. Well, I'm not getting playing time. The coach doesn't like me. This is unfair. You think that's going to be approachable, coachable employee in the workplace? 10 years from now? No way. We're inheriting decades of what we call feedback resistant behaviors. So next, you have to have very careful measurement. Let me explain what I mean by that. Everyone says, well, you got to measure what you've got to measure things so you know what to fix. I'm all for measurement. I'm all for ROI. Don't do it too soon. Here's why. When we measure, we're creating criteria. We're creating data. There's nothing wrong with that. Often when we create that criteria or data, what happens is people inevitably say, well, maybe it's not working. And I hate this in my business. When someone says, well, maybe Tim's program's not working. My program works fine. The question you should be asking is, how are our people working the program? Not if Tim's program is working. Now, let me show a little bit of my confidence. I had somebody say that to me. Well, maybe, the program's not working. I said, okay. I said, can I challenge your premise? And the HR manager said, sure. I said, bring a leader in here who said that, and I'll promise to be friendly. And I had a guy come in and say, I just don't think it's working. I said, awesome. I said, so how many coaching conversations are you having scheduled every week? He said, well, I know a lot with the work and, the things I'm trying to do with my job. When I looked back at the HR manager, I said, the conversation's over. She said, excuse me? I said, it's over. The guy looked at me and goes, what are you talking about? I said, what was my question? He said, well, you wanted to know what I was doing with coaching. I said, no. I said, how many scheduled coaching conversations have you had in the last week? He said, well, I'd have to look. And I said, okay, great. Who are you coaching by name right now? And what's the specific area that you're coaching to? He said, well, what I try to do, again, didn't answer the question. I look back at the HR manager and I go, the conversation's over. And she goes, what do you mean? I go, he's not answering my questions. So he's listening to his employees. And I looked at this guy and I said, you okay with this? Because this is kind of rough. And he goes, now I get what you're getting at. He was a really good guy about it. I said, but think about it. You don't even know the names of the people you're coaching or what you're coaching to. So you are not strategically coaching. My program teaches you to coach to a target area over the course of 12 sessions to go through the 3 levels of change: effort, progress, and results. Would that be a fair assessment? He goes, it is. So great. Can you walk me through each person that you're coaching and where they're at within that scale, like we taught you? He goes, probably not. So it's not the program. And again, I go back to the coaching framework. What was he doing? He was shooting from the hip. I said, so when you give feedback, is it ad hoc or scheduled? Ad hoc. And I said, so honestly, would your employees say it was constructive or positive in nature? He said, probably a little constructive. And we all do it, right? And the guy was great about it. He was wonderful to do this. So when you measure too soon, you might be building criteria not to coach, which can be extremely premature. So when you're measuring, my advice is measure cadence, number of coaching sessions. Where are they at within the framework per person or for the area that you're coaching your team to? What's going well? Get some narratives, get some stories. What's been challenging for you as a coach? Most of the things we hear when we measure at our client sites is, I struggle with conflict. I struggle with people who are resistant to feedback. Those require conversational skills, which require what? Practice. So the 5th area, know the fundamentals and purpose of coaching. When you think about the fundamentals of coaching, I'm going to give you some numbers, 8-1. The Gallup organization reports when we lead with people's strengths, people engage 8 times more. Yet when we call people into the office and we ask employees, what's your first impression? It's usually, oh, what did I do wrong? That's a simple thing that you can immediately change the culture of a team. Number two, 76%. 76% of the time, according to a study done at Harvard by Teresa Amable, that people were at their most motivated state when they were progressing and improving within their job. Almost 8 out of 10 people. It wasn't reward, recognition, or money. See, we throw money at people because we don't even know what motivates them. So if you can motivate to the job and call people in and say, you're doing a great job, specifically here, here, and here, motivation will go up. Now, going back to our coaching framework, the M, when you find out where someone wants to go, and let's say they want to be a future leader, they want to go into marketing, and you drop off a book at their desk and say, I loved our conversation. Here's something that'll help you get there. You just became really tough as a leader to quit on. So what's the purpose of coaching? Is your purpose you want to lower turnover? You want succession planning? All of that should go into your purpose. So here's probably the biggest thing that I would share with you is leverage coaching infrastructure. Let me explain what I mean by that. Right now, we're working with 2 companies, and we work with many, many companies at any given point in time. And the 2 companies that we're having the greatest traction, the numbers are up. We do something called coaching feasibility study. We measure all of our group coaching cohorts, our group sessions, and the numbers are up, and the accolades and the narratives are great. And this one company said, oh, Tim, you're doing a great job. And I go, it has nothing to do with me. You have a CEO who kicks off every single session. You could get anybody up here. And I'm not trying to trivialize or commoditize my company, Progress Coaching. What I'm basically saying is when you have executive support and participation, and as I'm shooting this video today, this CEO literally said at the start of the session, he goes, I'm learning how to coach. This is new to me. It's permission for everybody to be vulnerable. Number 2, infrastructure. Coaching is not a downward trajectory. Coaching needs to be downward, it needs to be sideways, and it needs to be upward. Let me define. When you're coaching downward, I think that boss to subordinate relationship should be sacred. The reason I say that to you is that when you are coaching and you are coaching people that are, how do I say this, are in, doing the annual review, you can't have a third party or an executive coach or an outside coach like myself do the end of the year review. It doesn't make sense. That boss subordinate relationship is sacred. Number 2, teach people how to give feedback and provide strength-based feedback, especially on a 3-to-1 ratio from peer to peer. Now, I've coached volleyball for 30-some years. What I make my guys do all the time is get feedback from a teammate once a week. It's called a listening chat. What am I doing well as a teammate? What's that one area you would encourage me to improve? And your only response, it's called a rule of engagement, is thank you. And the reason you do that is it conditions us to be emotionally in control. It avoids the rebuttal. Well, could you give me an example? We don't want an example. We want an example so we can fight and situationally get through that conversation and not look in the mirror. But time does a wonderful thing because when you think about it, you start to think, yeah, I'm not making as much effort as I could, or I'm not covering the back court as well as I could. So with that being said, what I would encourage you to think about with coaching infrastructure is also something called coaching champions. So a coaching champion is a peer-to-peer training. Now, this is something we do, but the reason I bring this up is we have so many water cooler talks. Going back to Gallup, 70% are neutral or negative. And by the way, negative people, they recruit. Positive people have their heads down. They're running the plays. They're not recruiting people. What you have to do is build up coaching champions, people who praise people's positivity, yet are also taught reframing techniques for those people who are struggling with positivity. So once you do that, what that does is it positions peers, whether leader or non-leader, to challenge one another. So if someone's negative at the water cooler complaining about a decision, the worst thing we can do is go up to that person and say, your attitude stinks. What is someone going to do? They're going to come up with the reasons why you're wrong. Whereas a coaching champion might come up and say, look, I've been overhearing your conversation. Would you mind if I just shared something with you? And the person might go, well, okay. What are you going to do to overcome it? And what could if you need some help, I'd love to help you. It's not about confronting. It's about giving someone a choice to positively react. Most people choose not to. See, people would rather gripe about things than face them head on and do the work that is required with changing it. So a coaching champion is more of a peer-to-peer endeavor. Now, the coachability and approachability, what we encourage leaders to do is to call people in for listening chats and literally say to his or her team members, what am I doing well as a leader? What would you encourage me to improve to help you? And what's something that's going on the front lines that maybe I need to give more attention or visibility to? And just listen, write it down and just say thank you. And leaders will say, well, you gotta, what if you hear something you don't like? I said, just let it sit. Because the minute you but somebody that you called into your office, they'll never want to come back in your office again. Now, the flip side is we encourage employees to approach leaders and learn how to use something called permission plus the sword. So, Mr. and Mrs. Boss, would you mind if I shared with you, that's permission, something that's going on with our interaction with our customers, the sword. And the last thing I want to do is assume what you see or not see. Would it be cool if I shared it with you? See, most people think coaching upward is about depicting what their boss is doing wrong. I'll save you the time. There isn't a job description in the world that says, make sure you're giving feedback to your boss on what he or she's doing wrong. People react emotionally, so we don't react logically. So when we hear the term coaching upward, oh yeah, my boss, what he does wrong, and I hear it all the time. The purpose of coaching upward is twofold. It's to protect your boss and provide visibility. It's never to judge them. It's never to evaluate them, because they might be making decisions based on criteria that people below them aren't privy to. Yet we all have opinions. And what that does, everybody, with a coaching infrastructure, it increases the conversation downward, pulling it upward from the leaders. In the middle, that peer-to-peer, get some coaching champions trained. Number 3, having people learn as individual contributors how to provide feedback upward safely, thoughtfully, plausibly, professionally. So when you are building a coaching infrastructure, or I should say a coaching culture, you first have to start with a coaching framework. You have to have a framework for coaching. Whether it's ours or there's Grow, there's other models out there. You have to have it. You're not going to get up in front of 1,000 people and just say, I'm going to give a speech. I don't really have a topic I'm focused on. I don't really have a structure that I'm going to follow. I'm just going to get up and wing it. It would be a terrible speech. Coaching is just a different stage. Number 2, this for me is the big one. Having conversations that are question-based is very difficult. Now, I have a great friend of mine, Dave Stevens at InPro. He and I, till this day, gosh, it's been 20 plus years since we've met each other. We still can role play. We can role play and pick up right where we left off. I haven't been under contract with our company for 7-8 years. We literally can role play because we are so well practiced. Now, here's the worst part about conversations. We don't go out socially and say, geez, I'm going to meet my friends at the bar. We're going to watch the ball game. I got to practice my questions. We don't do that. Yet we have to in the workplace with our people. If we don't practice questions or prepare ourselves, what do? We're going to gravitate to yelling and telling, commanding and demanding. We have to teach people, all people, how to become coachable and approachable. So if someone gives me feedback and I fold my arms, I'm like, could you give me an example? Are you serious? How often do we hear things like that? Now, if you're one of those people, we have to realize something. We just told that person to do what? Walk away from us or walk towards us? We told them to walk away from us. Versus something like eat feedback, such as, well, first of all, thanks for the feedback. Let me ask you, what are 2 things I could do to improve if you were to advise me right now? Person gives me that feedback. Well, let me tell you what I'm going to do with your feedback. Let me put that into practice, or let me think about what you said. Would you mind if I kind of came back to you in a week? Eat feedback is embrace, ask, and tell. Number 4, make sure you're measuring carefully. We have a rule, especially during the training learning phase. Don't measure too much in the first 12 months. It sounds counterproductive. I'll give you an example of something we just had with a company where they said, well, how do you measure your program? And I said, well, we have a variety of ways. We have something called quarterly coaching feasibility studies, which is our version of like a workplace engagement study. And I said, well, let me ask you, how do you measure your programs? Do you know I've never had a client answer that? yet they're going to hold us accountable for something they're not practicing. And it's really kind of that question people ask for outside resources. And I get it. Number 5, know your purpose. What are you trying to solve? If it's talent or turnover or retention or succession planning, those are the things that we have to think about. I'll give you an example. I have a friend of mine who has since sadly passed away, and one of my favorite managers to work with. And he was in charge of sales. I remember the CEO said, yeah, he had a really tough year. His numbers are down. And I remember thinking, it just sat funny with me. And I did the numbers. And out of 13 people on this guy's team, 9 of the 13 got promoted in a year. So I went back to HR and I said, what do you guys pay for a recruiter? How much does it cost you to rehire one person? Wouldn't you know it? 9 times that amount was his shortfall of what he was lacking in sales. He actually hit his numbers. He didn't hit it from a sales revenue standpoint, but he hit it from a sales cost standpoint. So I presented this to the CEO, my favorite CEO of all time. And Phil got up and went right down to this guy's office and said, come on in, I want to talk to you. And he said, I apologize. You've done such a great job of succession planning, something they do really, really well, this particular company. So again, we want to know the fundamentals and the purpose of what we're doing. Build out that coaching infrastructure. Get your executive team involved. Create coaching champions so you can have peer-to-peer conversations to build positivity. There's a tidal wave inside companies. 7 out of 10 are neutral or actively disengaged. Create a tidal wave that smashes into that of positivity. The last thing I'll tell you about coaching infrastructure, make sure if you are in the training, learning, and development field that you learn how to coach. Here's why. I tell this to learning and development professionals all the time. Never, ever, ever try to get buy-in to coaching, ever. And people look at me like, wait a minute, you sell this. This doesn't make sense. I go, here's why. When a leader hears we're starting coaching, what they hear is more stacks of paper piling up, more work. That's what they hear. So what does a sales leader want? They want an increase in sales, an increase in margins, an increase in ability to handle price objections so we don't give away margins. Customer service leader wants what? Handling angry customers, greater customer service metrics. So when we get buy-in, for lack of a better description, don't use the word buy-in, don't use the word coaching. Talk to them on their business imperatives. So what are you trying to achieve this year in the sales? Well, we got to increase our margins. What are margins at right now? 42 points. Where would you like them? Oh, 46. So what do you think the gap is? Well, I just don't think we negotiate very well. We're very quick to lower price to get the deal. Oh, what do you think is causing that? Well, I don't know. I said, well, how often are your leaders sitting down, not just educating them, but, maybe practicing those conversations? Geez, I don't know. I said, well, what if we came up with a plan together where we could assist you from the L&D team? And what would you like me to do in terms of involving the leaders? Because they really could, accelerate that number from 42 to 46. I never once said the word coaching. You have the same conversation with back office people, operations, efficiency, customer service. When you have conversations of a coaching nature based on what they're trying to achieve, you just plug in and say, what if we, and then you fill in the blank. You don't even have to use the word coaching. So I hope this has been helpful. Building a coaching culture takes time. If you are starting from ground zero, you will have history you have to erase. If you are a company that has a really good culture and you want to go to that next level, it'll be a little bit easier. We typically tell people traction, you're at about 12 to 18 months. Momentum, you're at about 18 to 36 months. After 36 months, so you go from traction, we got traction, we're making traction, we're having coaching. Momentum, we're starting to garner, we're starting to illustrate some successes. To continue a sustainable coaching culture is typically after about 36 months. If you have any questions, let us know. We'd love to talk to you. If you need help setting up your coaching culture, it's obviously what we do. But let us know your feelings on this video because this is a really important topic, especially with everything going on in the workplace. Thanks, everybody.